Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today in this video tutorial, I will be trying to demonstrate how to configure Always Encrypted, which is a feature that was introduced in SQL Server 2016. Always Encrypted is a feature designed to protect sensitive data like credit card information or national identification numbers, etc., that we store in our SQL Server databases or Azure databases. Uh, so this provides a way of separating the data from the people who own it versus from the people who manage it. So the people who own the data are typically application or the business owners, and the people who manage are the database administrators. Through this, we would also be able to achieve data in motion encryption. Always encrypted is achieved through a combination of two keys, so namely column encryption keys and the master keys. So the column encryption keys encrypt the data in the columns, and the master key actually protects these column encryption, one or more column encryption keys, by encrypting them. So these master keys are stored in either Microsoft certificate stores, or they can also be stored on Azure vaults. So let's get started on this. Always Encrypted is a feature designed to protect sensitive information such as credit card information or national identification numbers stored in SQL Server or Azure databases. In this video tutorial, I will try to demonstrate how the data looks before we set up Always Encryption, and then we will set up and configure Always Encrypted on a database with an application. We will test Always Encrypted option and how the data looks, and also we will see how to remove Always Encryption. So the setup that you would need to do a practical if you want to follow this is you need to have a SQL Server 2016 instance and a Visual Studio in a same or a different machine. So my setup for this tutorial is Azure VM with Windows Server 2016 running with SQL Server 2019, and my personal laptop with Visual Studio 2015. So let's get started. I actually have downloaded the application that is there that's available in Microsoft SQL Server samples. You can find the link below this video in the description. So right now I'm going to download the backpack application that was given. So this would create a database for our testing purpose. So I have it hosted on my GitHub profile. So yeah, you can just download it from there. So you need to download the backpack application. You need to also download this create application login so that you have an application login for this application. So the application name is Clinics. So that's a sample application from Microsoft to do some practicing on this. So, and also this is a Contoso Clinic application. I put it into a zip folder, and then you can just download it on your machine rather than downloading the entire Microsoft samples. So if at all you're trying to do it from a GitHub. So let's wait until this download is completed. And I have my Azure VM, so I'm just going to bring it up now in a while. So yeah, I'm just trying to unzip the Contoso Clinic zip folder. I'll extract the files, so that I just wanted to show you what are the files that are in there. So as you see, those are the files. So I'm bringing up my Azure VM now. I have already downloaded the backpack application and the SQL script to create the logins here. So I have my SQL Server Management Studio up, and I would import the data to your application. Select that option to create the database. So, and select the location for the backpack clinic.backpack, the one that you have downloaded, and then just go through the next options. So if you want to change the data and the log file paths, you could do so. I'm just leaving it to default locations at the moment. So yep, it's created now. Okay, now the next thing that I would do is I will bring up the SQL file which has the create login and the permissions that is needed. So yeah, I was just browsing through the tables just to see what is there in the database. So yep, in a while I'll bring up the SQL query. So just execute the query. It would create, I mean, of course, like, you need to enter the password here. So I'm just putting in a password. So that's fine. Even if you see it, that's okay. I'm going to change it anyways. It's actually a strong password that is needed for SQL Server. So that's the reason I had to just change it. So yeah, the password is in there. Now let's execute this, and it would create the login Contoso Clinic application, and that's done. I'm going to log in with the Contoso Clinic user that was just created. All right, yep. So I do have access and I can see the database. All right, so the login is successfully created with required permissions. That's there. All right, so let's go back to my personal laptop, and I'll actually try to bring up Visual Studio. I have a Visual Studio 2015, a community edition. And then I'll open the solution file. So just go to open projects or solution, and then in the downloaded files after you have unzipped it. So in that folder you should see the .sln file. So just open it, and on the right hand side you could see the list of application files here. So we need to make the connection string so that it connects to our database. So open web.config, just click on it, and you should see the code displayed on the left pane. So you have this connection strings tag there. So there the data sets already seems to be in there, but usually in your case it might not show up. So what you need to do is in this connection string, so you need to put in the server name, the instance name, and put the initial catalog as clinic and the user as Contoso Clinic application, and give the password that we have given while creating the user. So yeah, that's all is needed. And so now the application should be ready to connect. So this is my Azure VM, so that's the reason it just shows up. I mean that's the long URL that shows up there. But if you have it on your local machine, that's still fine. Just so that I can show it to you in a better way. So I created SQL Server on my Azure VM and application on my personal laptop. So just following the separation policies. So here I will just run the application. So it's building the files now. It's compiling and building it. So in a moment in Google Chrome, you should see the application open. There you go. So you see it. In your case, it might be a little slower because first time it's building, it would take a little time. So click on the patients on the top and you should see the data that's displayed here. As you see the SSN or the birth date, so all of them are like in a plain text. So what we are going to do is we are going to encrypt the columns SSN, social security number, and the birth date. So we will do that from SQL Server. So on the VM itself, we will try and query. So at the moment, let's say as a database administrator, so you're querying it, you can see the database administrator can see the social security numbers and the birth dates, everything in a plain text. So probably as an application owner, you would probably don't want the database administrator to see this data. So what we have just seen is we have just seen like how it looks before enabling it. So now let's try and set up and configure Always Encrypted on the database. So to do that, right click on the patients table, select Encrypt Columns. It opens up a wizard. Go next, select SSN and the birth date which we would want to encrypt. So encryption types, here you need to select, there are two types, deterministic and randomized. So deterministic is something that means that you can actually run queries on that particular, like inequality operator. It can build indexes and stuff like that, but for randomized you will not be able to do all those things. So here it's the master key configuration. So as I mentioned in the earlier, so master key configuration, it can be in the Windows store or it could be on Azure Key Vault. So I will just leave it to the default Windows certification store. And also make sure that when you're trying to enable the encryption, so there are no inserts or updates happening on the tables. There is no activity on it. So if at all you need to put it on a non-business hours, you can make it as a PowerShell script and let it run during the off business hours if needed. So that's not required right now. So I'll just go next. And so yep, just click on finish. It would actually take some time. I'm just forwarding the video here so that it could just so that I don't really want to waste your time here. So yep, I think right now the Always Encryption has been enabled on the patients table for the columns SSN and the birth date. So now let's run the same query again. So notice the difference. So the SSN and the birth date seem to be some sort of a jumble text, some sort of a text, but definitely not a plain text. It's in an encrypted value, some hexa decimal numbers or something like that, whatever you call it as. So now I come back to my personal laptop and I open SQL Server Management Studio and I'm trying to connect to my Azure VM SQL instance. It's connected. So remember, so let's say as an administrator, I might have access to Azure, the database server, which is my Azure VM. Personal laptop, assume that it's an application user or an application owner, anybody whom do you think as. So they are not administrators. So of course, at the moment I have just connected as an administrator here. So I'm just trying to fire up the same query, select star from patients, and see how the data shows up here for me. All right, so it's just the same as we see there. So we know that it is definitely encrypted. So it's doing its job of encrypting the columns. All right, so now what we would do, let's try to test the same thing from the application side. So stop that application running in the Visual Studio and I would refire or rebuild the application again. Or in this case, I just clicked on patients and yeah, it would actually take some time for you guys, but as I said, I'm forwarding this video, making it a little faster. So it would definitely throw up an error message, something like this sort. So the reason is because that certification or that encryption is not being handled here in the application, and that's the reason you see this kind of an error message. So what you need to do is you need to put this particular text column encryption setting equals enabled in the web.config file. So in the same in the string parameters, so the connection string parameters. So I've just done that. Save the web.config file. Okay, now in case if you want to see the data in a clear text, even if it is encrypted, so what do you do? So from SQL Server Management Studio. So what I would do here is we can put in the same details in the connection string. Here in SQL Server, when you connect it, select options, go to advanced connection parameters, put in the same text, column encryption setting equals enabled, and click on connect to the instance. Now let's try to run the query once again. So right now always encrypted is enabled. However, when we try to run the same query, this time you wouldn't see that random text. Instead, you would see the plain text or the real data. So that's because of the additional parameters that we have put in there. This is a parameterization queries. We can leave it for another video or another topic. There you go. As you see, so you can see it in plain text. And remember, we were able to see it only when we have run it from the server where the certificate is there, because we have selected the Windows certificate store, which is on this locally on the server, and hence we were able to do that. Let's try and do the same thing here. I'm again connecting as an administrator. Put in the same column encryption setting equals enabled here, and let's try to run the query again here. You would notice the difference. Remember, I'm again connected here as an administrator on my personal laptop. Sometimes system becomes a little slower for me to respond. So, okay, there you go. Right, it should throw up some sort of an error message. Right, so this is what was expected. So it would say fail to decrypt the column encryption key using the key store provider SQL Server certification store, because as I said, when we configure it, we have set up the configuration, the master key to be stored in Microsoft Windows certificate store on the server on the SQL servers. So, but that certificate is not available on my personal machine, and hence even if I'm connected as an administrator, I still cannot get the data. So it's the same thing with the application as well. So now the difference in error message, if you notice, so it's the same error message that you see on SQL Server Management Studio. It says fail to decrypt, and it will give you the hash. It will give you the certificate thumbprint. So basically what it means is when you're enabling an always encrypted, so the master key, it's actually getting stored on the Windows certificate store. That's what I have selected. So that particular certificate needs to be exported from there and put in on my personal laptop, so that it actually sees that and it validates that, because that's the key that is needed. I mean, that is the certificate that has got the key to decrypt the values. So that's what I'm going to do. Now go to cert manager, certmgr.msc in the run command. This I'm doing it on my Azure VM. So where we have the SQL Server. So there, go to personal and certificates. So there you should definitely see a bunch of certificates. So I know that the one that I have enabled it, because based on the expiry date, things like that. So go to the details, just right click, open it and go to the details, and you should find a field called thumbprint. So let's try and find it. Yep, there. So now try and validate this thumbprint. So if you notice, in the earlier notepad I have written the same thing. So just validate the same thing if we are really looking at the same certificate or not. Yes, we do. So that means that is a certificate that needs to be exported from the server, and at the moment application server is my personal laptop, so it needs to be there on my personal laptop. So right click on that, all tasks, export. So yeah, you need to also go select that private key, go next. So when you're also exporting the private key, it needs to be it should be a password protected. So yeah, in the next screen it would ask for a password. Yeah, there you go. So I'll just put in some password. Given a location where I need to get that file, put that, export the file, export the certificate. That's the name I have given. So just save it. All right, we are done. So the export is successful. Now go to the location, copy that certificate, the .pfx certificate file, to the application server. In my case, it is my personal laptop. So I take it from there and I copy it to my personal laptop. And in my personal laptop, again go to the certificate manager console, run, and then cert manager, certmgr.msc. So that's the one. Again, go to the same location in this console, personal and certificates. So we just need to import that certificate. Select the certificate where I have kept earlier. Oh yeah, so I need to make sure that it's all files that are selected. All right, so select it. So the password that we have, the private key, encrypting the private key, the one that we have given it earlier. Click next. Yep, and it's done. All right, so we have the certificate on the application server. So at the moment, as I said, my personal laptop is my application server, so it's here. And yeah, I'm just trying to verify, it matches the thumbprint the application is looking for. All right, so time to test again. So now let's see, let's try and connect it. Again, I'm just doing the same thing, connecting as an administrator on my personal laptop here again, not to the VM. And I will try to fire up the same query and see if it gives me a result or if it throws an error message. Let's try that. Select star from patients. Oh, okay, something, yeah, select star from, I missed that. All right, now as you see, now it's always encryption enabled, and I have the certificate on my personal laptop. I would say it as an application server at the moment, and yeah, I can see the data. Now let's try the same thing again. So just stop the build from Visual Studio. So everything is just the same, like encryption enabled option is there in web.config. Now let's run it. So it will build and bring up the application. So now click on patients. Earlier it had thrown an error message, which you don't see it now, and you can see the data in a clear text again. All right. So that is possible. That is possible because always encryption is enabled, and once the always encryption is enabled, then you have it. So here basically you have separated. So let's say if the database administrators are not really having access directly to the physical servers where SQL Server is built, so they would not be able to see the data, even though they have the elevated permissions on the databases. But then for the applications to work with it, you definitely need to have always encryption enabled driver, like if it's a .NET framework, I think it's .NET framework 4.6 and above, and so you have drivers for that, basically for ODBCs and for Java and all other applications. So here it's a .NET application, and my system has got 4.6 .NET framework and above in that. So yeah, so and I have exported the certificate that is created from the server, and I have put that here in my personal laptop. So the application is able to go to the certificate store and fetch the certificate and able to decrypt the column data and showing it in a clear text to me. So for the application people. So that's what we just did. We just did the always encryption option. Now let's try to see how we can remove it. If we don't want it, how do we remove always encryption? So yeah, let's go back to my VM now. And in my VM, I go to the encrypt columns. I'm in the same way, bring up the same wizard. Let me just try to first show you a few things here. So there are a few DMVs that through which we can get some information. So sys.column encryption keys gives you the information about the column encryption keys, and you also have a master key in a separate table. So that's sys.column master keys. All right, so I just make a note of it. So the reason I make a note of it is because, as I said, I'm trying to remove always encryption completely. So that's the reason I made a note of the column encryption keys and the master key. So right click on the database, go to the tasks. It's taking a while. It's an Azure VM, so obviously it takes some time. Go to Encrypt Columns. So basically I'm just bringing up the wizard. So select the table that I have done earlier. So here you see you just need to, don't have an option to select anything, of course, like the already encrypted columns. You just need to change the encryption type to plain text. So earlier we have selected deterministic and randomized. So now change both of them to plain text, hit next, and then basically just follow the wizard and finish it. So now it would not encrypt, though the keys are present, it will not encrypt the data because we have chosen to show the data in plain text. And now that we have the encryption key names here, so I will drop the keys. So drop column encryption key, give the encryption key name that we have pulled earlier. That would drop the encryption key, and next I would drop the master key. So it would be drop column master key and the key name CMK underscore auto 1. All right, so it's done successfully. So let's run the query once again just to make sure that they are done. Good, we don't see it any here, any encryption keys, and we'll also look for master keys. Yep. So yes, so the column encryption keys has been completely removed, and we need to make the same changes here in the application as well. So remove the column encryption value, the column encryption setting equals enabled. So just remove that particular option from the web.config file. All right, so save the web.config file and rerun the application again. So now you should not see any other issues. It's back to what we saw in the beginning. Perfect. So that's what we wanted to see. So yeah, so now that we have removed the always encryption, now we can see everything in plain text, what we intended. I hope I was able to demonstrate